Welcome back to Whitmercast, a podcast by the John Whitmer Historical Association. We bring you essays, interviews, panel discussions, and broadcasts related to Mormon history and restoration studies. My name is Seth Bryant, manager for John Whitmer Books. I'm happy to bring you a crossover episode from Latter Daily Digest with Gene Judson as he interviews Paul DeBarthe and Michael Riggs about their book Hawn's Mills Hamlet, a Phase III Archaeological Investigation. This was published by John Whitmer Books as part of our archaeology series, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend getting a copy today. In our show notes, there's a link to the original interview on YouTube where you'll be able to see some great images and video feeds of the authors. In the show notes, you'll also find a link to purchase the book. To find all of this, go to jwha.info and under the Publications menu, click on Whitmercast. Also at jwha.info, you can find our entire backlog of episodes and JWHA journals, as well as information on how to join or renew your membership. With that, here is the audio from Latter Daily Digest.
Welcome, everyone, to Latter Daily Digest. Latter Daily Digest aims to recognize and promote creators, and whether it's a podcast or a book or a project. And today we're going to talk about a project that Michael Riggs and Paul DeBarthe worked on for a long time, and then they ended up creating a book. And it's the Hawn's Mills project. And I'll let Michael and Paul introduce yourselves. We can go with Michael first, I suppose.
Well, Paul's the lead author, but I'll go ahead. Yeah, thanks for having us, Gene. Appreciate the opportunity to let people know about this book. It was published in September of last year, and we're excited about it. It was a project that we started with a log house, as you can see here, where this collaboration that Paul and I had for 10 years in Caldwell County. And our first project was at what became known as the 1837 Rich Log House, south of Far West by about 5 miles. And we had stumbled upon it. I had been leading a group with the Missouri Mormon Frontier Foundation, showing them where settlements were during the Mormon period. And Ron Romig and I and several of the others in the group, we ended up looking up and seeing this house that was starting to fall down and could see a log sticking out. So we went up and looked at it. Anyway, we got 3 years of 3 seasons. Ron had gone to school with Paul and at Graceland, and so they knew each other, and we needed an archaeologist. So reached out to him, and he agreed to come and work on this project with us, and it was exciting. There's another book that Paul and I are in work on right now, which will talk about this project, but that's how it all started. Then we went for 2 years on a project that was just south of where the Far West burial ground was, west of Far West, and we dubbed it Cemetery South. 2 years, lots of artifacts, but we never could definitively show that it was a Mormon era. But it was good. It was fun. Finally, we got permission from the Community of Christ, who were the owners at the time, of the Hawn's Mill site, which is 20 acres on the extreme eastern side of Caldwell County. And we did 5 years there, and that's what this book documents.
And when did the 5 years start, roughly?
What was it, Paul? 2001, I think it was.
2001 through 2006. 2006 was the last season.
Right. And Michael, go ahead and tell our audience a little bit more about you in particular, like where you were born and from and school and stuff like that. Just like a 2-minute Mormon story or something like that.
I was raised in Southern California, and I was unchurched growing up, and in my teens was exposed to Mormon missionaries and converted, but my parents made me wait till I was 18 to join. And I was in that church until about when the September 6th people were excommunicated, 1993 is when I stopped attending, stopped
You remember
going.
the name of the ward?
That I was in at the time. I was living
Yeah.
in Hesperia
Okay.
at that time. But anyway, oh no, it moved to we were in Hesperia and then we moved over to Simi Valley. So I guess it was actually Simi Valley. We waited until about December before we actually decided to call the bishop over and say, here's our temple recommend. You know, we part of that is sustaining the leadership of the church, and we can't sustain people who are getting excommunicated for thinking.
That's right.
Um,
Because you wanted to be
but
able to think.
yeah, well, I mean, it was a long time coming. You know, you could we were part of my first wife and I. We were part of kind of the Sunstone dialogue. You know, MHA type of. If that had been its own state, we probably would still be in. I don't know, but it's not.
Sure.
And so it was just kind of a gut punch when it finally came.
And where
And
was your education?
my undergraduate is from Park University. I'm sorry, from University of San Francisco,
Hmm.
and it's in organizational behavior management. And I did a master's um, at Park University in Kansas City. It was part of what then evolved into the Community of Christ Seminary, and it's a master's of art and religion. And I did 33 credit hours of a PhD program in the University of Missouri, Kansas City, religious studies and history. And so,
Okay. I'll advance a slide and then we'll let Paul tell his story.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to follow. I'm not quite sure how my story follows, but I grew up on a farm in Iowa. My father had walked from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Lamona, Iowa in 1931 to attend Graceland College. And there is a certain element of endurance hiding in there that I hope that I have inherited as well. My mother was an academic. My father was a quiet minister. And in the community of Christ, my wife and I have had the privilege of continuing that. Unfortunately, she passed to the other side in February last year. And so I'm now on a new chapter serving as the lead volunteer at the Joseph Smith Third Historic Site in Lamoni, Iowa. But the background really comes from archaeology and Nauvoo. I started there with University of Missouri at Columbia with Bob Bray in 1971. I became his crew chief, and in 75 we dug the times and seasons structure, and then I moved to the mansion house, and I still have the mansion house book to get written, although I've written 1,000 pages. The publishers say nobody wants to read 1,000 pages about a house, so they've asked me to make 3 books. So I'm in the process of working on that. But the Hawn's Mill book that Mike and I have just produced picks up another of the interesting chapters, because we were working here on a site that is of significance to the whole restoration movement. And the fact that in the Mormon history, it's the Hawn's Mill massacre, the fact that in Missouri history, it's perhaps a footnote and often not even that, made it so that when my students went to give a presentation in Caldwell County to the Historical Society, they had that dilemma to know what to say to these people whose ancestors had been part of the militia when they're talking about the massacre at Hawn's Mill. And I was delighted when they came up with the term, the Hawn's Mill incident in the Mormon War. And
That's
so,
right.
go ahead.
So people in Caldwell County still harbor resentment for Mormons back then?
there's mixed emotions. Principally, Hawn's Mill became the place where local teenagers go and drink beer at night. You know,
Well, and any signs there would be left for target practice.
right? That too. Yeah.
And so one thing that our viewers will be interested in is noticing that the spelling, instead of Haun and called Hawn's Mill, it's Hawn apostrophe S, Mills. And so explain how that spelling come about.
That's Mike's. Mike has the history. I do the archaeology.
Well, historian Alex Baugh at Brigham Young University had done research on Hawn and in his life before and after this event. He ends up going to Oregon, and his name was spelled Hawn. I noticed, and when I discussed this some in the book, the Mormons who were contemporaries of his. Oh, by the way, Hawn was a never Mormon, but he had this settlement, and he was, very friendly to letting them settle in with him in the Hamlet. He needed people there, so it made sense. Anyway, they spelled his name many different ways, and people wrote redress petitions, for example, who knew him. They spelled it different ways, and some called it Mill, some called it Mills. The reason we use Mills is because it's two mills. There was a sawmill and a grist mill, so it's plural, not singular, and so that explains that. I wanted to say one little serendipity about Paul mentioned Nauvoo. A couple seasons into doing the log house, it just dawned on me one day as we were working up there that I knew Paul, because I had been, as a 19-year-old, I'd gone to Nauvoo and was walking around with a friend, and we came across this site. They were digging up there, and this guy came over and said, "Hey, here's a couple trowels. You want to help out?" And so we did for a couple hours and found a few things, and then we went on our way. And it just dawned on me all these years later. So here I am again with this guy who put the trowel in my hand way back when, and we're working together again. So it's just sort of serendipity.
You're both old, stuck in the mud types.
Yep.
Well, if I recall correctly, Mike Riggs found a key by the mansion house, and that key may very well have opened the door to Mormon history for him. And he's become, in my view, one of the best historians of the Mormon Mormon trail and the Mormon experience that we have.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you, Paul.
So are we done with this slide, or is there one?
Well, I just wanted to make the point of this slide was you can see the portion of the parking lot, and we'll talk about that more in the next slide. But there's, change is inevitable, and this site has gone through many, many changes over the years due to hydrology, due to flooding, and different occupations of being farmed, and it's gone through a lot, and it continues to, because during the time we were digging, it was property of the Community of Christ, and that we got permission from to do it. But then some years later, it got sold off to the LDS Church, and so they are making some improvements to the property as well. So our book is kind of a record, of the pre-transfer appearance during the Community of Christ era time. So it's just another document that is important in the record.
That's right.
We actually hope more archaeology gets done there. We don't think we'll be the ones to do it, but we hope it does. There's a lot more that can be done, right, Paul?
Yeah, we're looking here. If you look closely, you'll see the darker square zones in the field in front of us. Those are parts of what we call the knoll, which the Ross Knoll, where we found evidence of a residence. And then you're looking back toward that to the east, toward the current. This is a 2023 picture of the current parking lot. The mill would have been to the right, and the stream is to the right, and also directly in front through those trees. But the 20 acres or so that we've had a chance to explore, there's basically 8 acres here in this field. That whole site is of significance because there were, as Mike has inferred, some 17 people shot and killed on the 30th of October in 1838. And that story is a fascinating story, an early conflict on the frontier.
Next slide.
Here we see a couple of freshly opened squares, again looking the same direction. We had high school students primarily initially, and then our last season we were able to pull in college students for a week. But then we had volunteers from across the the community across the region. And there's, in our book, we have about 200 people's photographs in there. Not all of them are identified, but there's a lot of opportunity for people to look and find themselves in our book.
One of the things that the squares, and I'm getting out of my lane a little bit, but it's not just that you're out there digging up trying to find cool stuff, you know. The material culture, the artifacts reveal a lot, not just well, where they are in relation to the field, at what depth they were found, and then they tell us something about who the people were, because looking at these artifacts, does it tell us, were they wealthy people? Were they poor people? You know, what was something about their daily life? Those are the kinds of questions that we're looking to answer as we were doing this work.
Okay. So about how deep did you find 1830 material? And did you find other things at certain levels, like a quarter that's dated like 1940?
Let's go to the next slide, and we'll begin to pick up more of the artifacts. But let me explain in here first. Looking to the north from the bypass, you see the history tells us there was a mill here. There's no mill there today. There's no buildings left today. But here is a ditch which is dug in a straight line, bisecting the site. And so, presuming that ditch was a bypass, we did some testing and found artifacts along its side to verify that it was undoubtedly the bypass. And then there's a holding tank area, which probably would have held trees before they were cut, before they were put through the sawmill. We're looking from that holding tank here to the north, and this view to the north then would be from that's the direction the militia came in. They are on the north, the east, and the west to sort of sandwich the Hamlet and start shooting and killing people who were primarily, the men were in the log blacksmith shop, which had no chinking, and so it proved to be a deadly spot for them. So just in terms of getting a picture of the site, we wanted to have a chance to see the context today. Now, we'll be going to the artifacts here momentarily, and in response to Gene's question, because the whole area has been plowed repeatedly, the plow has stirred the artifacts up, so we have 2,000 years of artifacts mixed in the top foot. The ones that are closest to in situ would be at the bottom of the plow zone, which is basically 10 to 12 inches below surface. However, in some places, the flood deposits have made that 3 feet below surface. And so it's a fascinating area to dig, because the depth of the soil to the artifacts will make a significant difference in terms of what part of the site are you on.
The further you get from the creek going north, the shallower they are. You know, it's incredible depths of deposition that takes place on that creek in terms of moving soil, silt, and piling it on one side. And we found, well, we mentioned a diaper at 13 feet, Paul.
Yes.
A Zarda cottage cheese lid, you know, way down. It's just because it's very dynamic. We learned from Newell Kitchen, who was a LDS member who works for the Department of Agriculture. He was very instructive in talking to us about modern farming techniques and how that changed erosion and everything else. So he came out on the site, did some studies with us. This slide I wanted to mention, though, you know, Paul and I had this conversation very early on when we worked out there about what do we do if we find the dry well where these bodies had been hastily buried. And we, you know, ethically, we concluded that we would not disturb it any further. If we accidentally found it, we would not disturb it any further. We didn't find that there'd be any great benefit from studying the bodies or anything. We know who's in there and all that. And we sort of approached it like the USS Arizona did, who you know, people know where they are. They're in Pearl Harbor. but they don't try to exhume them and rebury them and all that kind of stuff. They're in their appropriate burial spot, and we feel the same about these people. And so that was a question we had to raise and had to figure and work through at the ethics of it.
That's right. I'm watching like the History Channel. I know that there's a technology called LiDAR. And has that ever been thought as something that might be used? And do you know how much it would cost to do like a LiDAR survey?
We would love to use LiDAR. It wasn't necessarily available to us in this project in the early 2000s, but I've proposed it to John Whitmer as a possibility if we can get interest in doing it. And there are other sites we'd love to see get done. I don't know it'll be Paul and I doing them, but Guyman's Horse Mill, for example, and the Maribone settlement in Davies County. There are a number of places that it would just be a wonderful tool to use to kind of help identify productive places to do excavation work.
Right.
But like it says at the top of this slide, our Phase III Archaeological Investigation is intrusive. And once you dig, you can't undo the damage. So you get one shot at it. So if you're going to do it, you got to be very careful and make sure that it's not just a scavenger hunt. It's science.
And so 17 people were killed, but 15 were in the dry well. Where were the other two?
They didn't die immediate, or they died a little bit after. And one is over White Cemetery, which is nearby. Placed over there, but the people after they got attacked, they kind of like were just dazed, oh my gosh, what happened, and so they buried them hastily in this, like I said, it's a dry well. They were working on digging the well, it just wasn't complete. So they had this dry well, and they hurriedly put them in there because they got out. They figured that the regulators would be coming back and attacking them again.
Right.
And so
about
it was
how
just,
many in the area would be considered survivors of the attack?
oh gosh. Well, here, this is this is one of those things. It's like, oh my goodness. There was the people that were living there, and I don't know, 20 or so families, and not right there, but in the area, and they would often come in to do their milling and work and stuff like that. But on top of that, you had Joseph Young, who was Brigham's brother, was part of a group called Kirtland Camp, and they had left Kirtland. Ironically, they left Kirtland right around the 4th of July, and they trekked towards Missouri. Some of them broke off at one point and went on to Far West, and then they were sent up to Adamant. But Joseph Young's group got kind of separated a little bit, and they ended up coming into Hawn's Mill and camping for a couple of days, and then they were going to go on to Far West. Well, that was the time when the attack took place. So they just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And one of their people in that group was a little 10-year-old named Sardius Smith, and he's the one of the things that you hear the most about Hawn's Mill is the boy that was under the bellows in the blacksmith shop, and he was pulled out, and they said nits become lice, and they blew his brains out, and he's one of them in the well. And I did quite a bit of little research on that, and so that whole story, there's some historical problems with it, and who shot him, and nits become lice, if that's the actual quote, and all that. You can read about it in the book. But anyway, enough about the well.
But let me add to that.
So dozens of people sort of survived that were in the neighborhood.
Oh yeah. Paul can talk about this, going up Escape Hill and all that stuff. Paul, you want to discuss that?
Well, I wanted to go back to your comments about the Kirtland camp, because to me, one of the more interesting discoveries was that the same campsite was used by the Kirtland camp people when they crossed the river over into Palmyra, Missouri, that was used by the Potawatomi, who had their village burned by the federal troops in Indiana. And the Potawatomi Nation, with some 800 people or so, got marched across Indiana, Illinois. They camped at the same spot that the currently camp did. And then they were marched across Missouri. And if you follow the route of Highway 24, occasionally you'll see the markers where some of the 100 or so people in that First Nations group were buried.
And is
so,
that,
again,
Paul, is that contemporary to the Hawn's Mill massacre or
They-
some other thing?
they would have
Couple
been out in
months.
Missouri at the same time that Hawn's Mill occurred.
Yeah, yeah, very contemporaneous. Yeah,
And so-
there's a map. There's a really good map that we had BYU cartography people. It's 2 maps they did for us in the book that turned out really good. And that's one of them.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
just a interesting thing.
What is this object? One of the early Missouri Mormon Frontier Foundation meetings, somebody reported that there was a beam showing on the south side of Shoal Creek, and that beam was undoubtedly a marker for the dam or the mill. And so therefore, let's check it out and make sure that we know just what we're looking at. Well, the beam was about 2 inches wide, 12 inches tall, and here it was sticking out of the bank. So I acquired a canoe and went up and I got this close-up photograph on it. And you'll see that there is no wood grain in that beam. That beam is actually nothing but clay.
It's a fluke formation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, people get excited about things like that, but sometimes nature deceives. Now, in talking about artifacts, here you see the hands of some of the kids with artifacts they found on the dig that particular day. And you'll see there's ceramics, there's ferrous metal, some of that probably from the blacksmith shop, and glass. The assortment of cultural material that we found was clear evidence of occupation. However, when it comes to distinguishing the Mormon period occupation from the later, that becomes much more difficult because they were using the same dishes, the same facilities generally, and buying from similar spots. But one of our very interesting exercises was to compare what we found with what Ray Matheny had found in his excavations at Adamandiaman, particularly when he was looking for the remains from the Lyman White House. The Lyman White House, unfortunately, though, was not occupied by Lyman White. It was built during his lifetime, but he got put in prison, and Joseph Smith had spent a few nights there, but Lyman White didn't. The house that he lived in also got excavated, but it had been previously occupied and was later occupied. So again, to distinguish the Mormon period artifacts from what the Mormons had left behind, the material culture that they left behind, was not distinguishable from what their predecessors and post-ancestors had left behind. And so it became rather interesting for us to try to make that comparison. We did find one diagnostic artifact that clearly belongs to the Mormon period, and we'll show you that in a moment.
What it did show us, though, in terms of the comparison, was yes, the Mormons were purchasing items from the same suppliers in Richmond and Liberty and other spots that their non-Mormon neighbors were getting them too. It kind of showed that if you think about it, when the Mormons migrated from Ohio and other places to come to Missouri, they weren't bringing a Mayflower travel trailer truck full of their stuff. It was pretty sparse what they were bringing, and so they did have to acquire what they got while they were in Missouri, and that's interesting. It's informative to when you really stop and think about it. There was during the Mormon War, there was a raid on Gallatin. The Danites did, and they went into Stallings' store, and who was a non-Mormon, but he had been trading with the Mormons. And they took his account book, which was, you owe me, these are the people that owe so much money for things that they had gotten. And they took that and then they burnt down the store. They looted it and then they burnt down the store. And there's a letter that Stallings writes to Joseph Smith. It's in the Joseph Smith papers, actually, that where he's saying, look, if you will just give me my ledger book back, I'll consider my accounts closed with any of the Mormons that owe me money. But I want to get that book back because I need to claim the money from the non-Mormons. So that goes to show they were using, they got the same items from the same suppliers.
In this particular photo, if you look closely beside the trowel, you can see the key is still in situ, and Bethany has used the paintbrush and uncovered it at about level 4. That's 2-inch levels. And so she's down close to the plow zone, so it'd be close to in situ, but to find a key to a house that would have been on that site was something to smile about. Not very often you get to find the key to a settlement.
Right. We should probably mention that this artifact and the others that we recovered there are housed in the Community of Christ facility in Independence at the temple, and so that's where what we brought up is put there.
So there's like an archaeological display in like a visitor center by the temple, or in?
No, these are in storage. They could, though, since they have the artifacts, they could be displayed at some point.
Need to have a curator, right?
If they did.
Rachel Killebrew is the archivist, and she's the one that is the one who has that. The artifacts have been marked, labeled from where they come. And so if you look at an individual artifact, you can read the numbers on it to know how far it came from the benchmark. Unfortunately, with the change of ownership, the benchmark has been moved. And so it makes things just a little bit more confusing. It'll make it more difficult for anybody who went to replicate and pirate the site too. So
that's right. We're just 14 years away from the 200th anniversary.
Yeah. Well, having those artifacts there was helpful to Paul and I, because we were writing this many years after we had done the initial excavation. So we were relying on our field notes and photographs and a number of things that we had. And but having access to the actual artifacts was helpful too.
Let's move on.
This, the story of the dig and everything, it was really for Paul's students from Shawnee Mission East High School, and we had volunteers and others who came along. This is a mother and daughter who really were fantastic working with us, Mindy and Dessa Crum. And, for them, it was a bonding in the dirt, experience as mother and daughter. Dessa's all grown up now. In fact, in New Orleans, and I actually got to see her. She's, a full grown woman now. It's been so long, but it's just, and she loves the book, got the book, and both her and her mother have read it and like it. So yeah, it's kind of gratifying to look back on that and know that other benefits came as part of the experience as well.
How many people do you think might have assisted in the dig over the 5-year period? If you had to guess.
Golly. What do you think, Paul? Hundreds of people.
Yeah, I think we have pictures of nearly 200 in the book.
There you go.
And I would anticipate probably that's at least half. I would highlight, though, that when people ask what's the most important thing we dug up, and I think probably it was better relationships.
That's right.
Yeah.
The fact that Mike comes out of an LDS background and Unitarian background, and I come out of the Community of Christ background. These were local people, regional people. There were very few Mormons actually involved in this project. This was
Why do you think that is, Gene? Why do you think we had not that many LDS people?
Let's see. It's a bad taste in their mouth, or that not very many live out that way.
No, it's because most of our digs were scheduled on Sundays.
Ah,
so it wasn't But we did have people who would come through that were tourists, and they would stop and kind of see what's going on. And Paul did what he did to me back in Nauvoo when I was 19 and hand him a trowel and get him working. So
That's right.
we did have some LDS participation, but not like on the regular we did with people like Mindy and Dessa.
That's right. I don't know how many chores I got out of because it was Sunday.
Well,
Well, our crew would meet at 1 o'clock at Panera's on Sunday afternoon, go drive for an hour, work for 2 hours, and then come back home again. And in those 2 hours, you get a bunch of kids like what you can see in the picture here. They begin to move some dirt and find things. And the problem was that there was not any security from 1 week to another. And so we ended up with some piracy. The kids saw that. They recognized the importance. If they left an artifact in the wall or in the dirt and next week came back and discovered that somebody had snatched it, it gave them a good awareness that people don't treasure the archaeological process as much as those that are actually doing it.
That's right.
so we have one picture there with Paul, and it's kind of more of fall weather. You can see people got sweatshirts on, and then we had the summer, and I think we preferred the fall because the fall, Paul's very susceptible to poison ivy, and we had plenty of poison ivy, not far from where he's standing there in that picture, actually. And I'm pretty weak on snakes, and in the wintertime they were hibernating, so that was better. So
You and Indiana Jones.
yeah, and it got hot. I mean, when you're in there in the summertime, that's where a lot of the time was spent in the summer, but they get hot.
Okay, I mentioned earlier the fact that we had one diagnostic artifact that spoke of the Mormon development, and here it is. To find a piece of type at Hawn's Mills was exquisite, because that same 6-point piece of type matches the type of the Times and Seasons that was used in Nauvoo, and the Times and Seasons press in Nauvoo had been dug up from under a haystack at Far West and transported to Nauvoo in 1839, the spring, so that Don Carlos Smith and Ebenezer Robinson could use it in publishing the Times and Seasons and the 1840 edition of the Book of Mormon, which, by the way, we've just completed the excavation of that Times and Seasons #2 site this summer. So we're hoping that it'll be reconstructed shortly. But to find a piece of type at Hawn's Mill, what's it doing there? That get tracked in on somebody's boot? Was it dropped on the way from Kirtland on the way out? Just what is the story behind it? But the fact of it's being positive evidence, and the Mormons were the only ones that had a press in that area at that time, means that here we are with one diagnostic artifact that distinguishes the Mormon material culture from that of their neighbors.
Well,
The Mormons had a press in Far West called the Elders Journal, and they had used a press that they had brought from Kirtland. So this type, maybe it fell out in the wagon on the way in.
about how far
Ohio,
is Far West
or
from
maybe when it was,
Hansville?
like Paul said, it could be when they were leaving Far West, they went in the night and they dug up the press and took it out. And they would have gone through through Hawn's Mill. That was a regular part of the route in and out of Missouri for the Mormons.
About how far was Far West from Hawn's Mill?
36 miles, something like
16 miles.
16, you're right. Yeah, 16. It's across the county. It's on they're on either end of the county, Caldwell County.
The
So
musket balls speak of the riflery, and we do have quite a lot of historical account of the battle of the regulators coming in from the north, the east, and the west, and then firing on people as they went up to Scape Hill on the south. And so what we found in terms of those balls could be seen here as at least part of the evidence. But the fact is that the assortment of guns used is represented here, and we are dealing both with rifles and pistols in the evidence of the shot found.
I suppose over the 180 years or so, farmers had gotten a lot of those as well that are long gone now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and metal detectors have been there looking for them as well.
Well, I actually found one of those, and it was while I was what we call chunking a square, which is just taking the grass out. So it's right at the top. And that could have been from plowing, they got plowed, pulled up,
Yeah, it
that
just
kind
looks
of
like a
thing.
chunk of dirt.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not surprising to find musket balls at Hawn's Mill.
Here we
This,
have some of the transfer printed wares that we found. You see the red transfer print and the blue. And the one on the right is curious because it has a red paste rather than the white paste that we would find much more commonly. And that red paste may actually have been an American-made piece. We don't yet have a good provenance on that. That is to know where it would have come from, because it's one of those rarities. But the red paste earthenwares were early on the frontier, more commonly used for utilitarian wares, and so this may well have been in that pattern. But many of the transfer printed pieces would have come from England, and the fragments of pieces that we have, we've not been fortunate enough to get maker's marks, but comparing the designs with what we found at Nauvoo and elsewhere, we can be pretty confident that most of these are European pieces, and in some cases, probably the Clues brothers, Adams, Podmore and Walker, and other such 1830s producers were producing what they had in Missouri.
this is kind of the thing is that we were comparing to what they found at Adirondack that we mentioned earlier too. So the last season was interesting. Just as we were concluding the season before, we started stumbling on evidence of a Native American occupation of the site, more on the west side, and so we were, pretty anxious to be able to get back into that in our 5th season out there to see what else we could learn about it. We ended up finding a fire pit that was just unbelievable. It was saturated with grease, from deer and whatever meat. And how thick was that, Paul? 6, 7 inches? I don't know. It was pretty, which indicated many years of being used.
Well, you can see the pit cleaned out there. You're dealing with about 5 or 6 inches of depth in that bisect.
Right. So, and then we found a number of catlinite, and a number of really interesting artifacts as well. But we used this field school. They worked on the Mormon era stuff too, but we used them a lot in that 8-day field school we did for Northwest Missouri State University to work on the Native American sections as well.
We didn't know at the time that it was Native American. Let's get on to the next slide. Here's some of the catlinite type material that we found, evidence of First Nations people occupying the site some 2,000 years ago. And let's go to another slide to get the projectile point. Whoop, I'm sorry, we didn't have projectile point. Right, my apologies. Mike and I have not necessarily gone over the same pattern here. But anyway, the projectile points that we have from the site give us a 2,000-year date on the occupation, and that corresponds with the kind of material you're finding here with the ground catlinite type stone. The fact is that we were looking for Mormon period material, and occasionally you find brick and other Mormon period artifacts, but then, well, you kept finding the prehistoric material beneath it, and that was just simply a bonus for us in terms of the overall understanding. Hawn's Mill is a sacred site because of its Mormon history, but it's also been a sacred place. We have evidence of 2,000 years of occupation, probably as much as 5,000 years of occupation on that bend in Shoal Creek. And with that evidence, to appreciate that people have appreciated and made their sacred offerings there for that long means that we would hope for the site to be preserved and carefully understood and maintained as a legacy for future generations.
you know, there's sort of an adage in the archaeology that sort of says that if it was a good place for one group of people to settle, it would have been equally promising to others, you know. So it shouldn't be a surprise that you found that kind of range of occupation. You had water, you had ground, you know, there was a lot of advantageous things about that site where people would want to be.
That's right. So the slideshow I have, should we keep on going or?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Okay, so this sort of Paul, when he was working up in Nauvoo recently, Ron Romig was there, and they got talking about Hawn's Mill because Ron was really involved in all these projects, and he was the archivist for the Community of Christ for many years, and involved in Missouri Mormon Frontier Foundation. And John, he's a past president like I am, John Whitmer, and things like that. So, but anyway, Paul got him to sketch on a napkin his conception of the mill, and so we put that in the book. Actually, it's kind of an homage to his work. But
Sure.
many students, volunteers, like I said, and unsuspecting random tourists that got enlisted in the digging. But there were groups: Missouri Mormon Frontier Foundation, John Whitmer, Mormon Historic Sites Foundation out in Utah contributed some funds and support towards what we were doing. We needed it was a group effort. It wasn't just Paul and I. It was a big team that worked on these projects over that decade. So this is a shout out and a thanks to them.
One point of emphasis, Ron's illustration will not show you, but we're confident that one of the problems that people have had in looking for the remains of Hawn's Mill in the past, not only the fact that the stones have largely been pirated, but the site probably was larger than what we've been looking for. And we did find the burned granite. I think the next picture, if we have another picture, will show
No, it's not there, Paul.
you cut it out, okay.
Yeah.
We found the burned granite at 3 feet below surface that showed where the mill wheels had been shaped. And for them to pull in a granite boulder and then have to flake off and burn off the faces to make it so that they had a level surface, not just 1/1000th of an inch of variance across that surface. Just a phenomenal workmanship that was required of the millwright to be able to get those millstones to work well together. But the idea of how that whole system was set up, here's a very good sketch, at least a good idea that Romig put together. In our examination of Whitney Mill downstream a few miles, we found that it was much larger. I think it was, what was it, 2 rods by a rod and a half. And we've been thinking in terms of more of a rod by a rod in terms of the size. And so
The rods are 16 feet or something.
16.5 feet per rod, yes. And that was a measure that was commonly used in the Mormon period. And so to have a larger facility that has been pirated makes it that much more difficult to find the place to begin. But given the ditch, the bypass, the holding tank area, and the fact that the burned granite is just to the north of that, suggests that the mill would have actually been adjacent.
There you go.
The guy who owned Whitney's mill, he actually was one of the participants, one of the regulators that attacked. This was a competitor of his, basically. So he was there. But one thing I think that we've kind of alluded to is the fact that the site has changed substantially. I think our book, for somebody who's just interested in coming and seeing Hawn's Mill and trying to get a better appreciation for what might have been where, and what the topography and things might have been like, would gain a lot from if they did a little research, bought the book, read it, and come to the site to get an understanding of what they're looking at. So I kind of into this. This is back when we were young and good looking. And We had more fun than humans should be allowed to have, right, Paul?
Well, and we're still enjoying it in spite of the fact that
Yeah,
we've had to chew over these words to put them together in a book for 20 years. The fact is, though, that we're still good friends, and again, one of the best things that we have dug up is better relationships.
That's
yep,
right. A
amen.
couple of grown kids playing in the dirt.
Yep. We highly recommend it.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. And thanks, Michael and Paul. And if everybody, and whoever's made it to this far, I'd like to thank Robert Cook over there on the side. He's been helping with some of the technical difficulties we've had getting this going. But it's great to have you guys on the show.
Thanks, Gene. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
We want to thank you for tuning in to the Whitmercast. John Whitmer Historical Association is an educational nonprofit institution. For more information, visit www.jwha.info, where you can meet our team and join the association, read past issues of the JWHA Journal, and get updates on upcoming conferences and events. Our theme music is I Love to Tell the Story, composed by Tom Moraine. This podcast is a production of John Whitmer Historical Association, all rights reserved.